Yes, and unfortunately, one of the signs of an abuser is that they justify why they do it to other people.
Mm,
There's a
mm,
justification. That person is inferior, they're a taker, they're a sinner,
they
they're
deserved it.
lazy,
Yes.
they're entitled.
Mm.
And we just heap these justifications for abuse. And justifying abuse is a sign of mental unwellness. But in the process, with someone who has great power can enroll lots of people in the same belief. And that separates them from their own humanity.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you being here as we continue our ongoing goal to help our listeners live their best audacious life ever. And I'm thrilled to have you here with us. And I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on our journey towards greatness. Now, imagine your life is a room filled with potential, but the light is off. And it's only when you flip that switch of self-discovery and purpose that you illuminate the true beauty within. Just like turning on that light in a dark room, discovering your purpose within can unveil a path of authenticity and fulfillment. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Phyllis Leavitt, a seasoned psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience. Phyllis's expertise lies in helping individuals heal from past wounds and traumas, guiding them towards a path of self-discovery and personal growth. Now, in this episode, Phyllis highlighted the critical importance of acknowledging our past conditioning as well as those traumas that are contained with them, and how they shape our beliefs and behaviors. By delving into our origins and past experiences, we can begin the journey of healing and transformation, breaking free from harmful patterns and embracing a more positive self-image. And really what we're talking about again is flipping that light switch. So we'll turn the lights on, have it nice and bright for all of you, and we'll turn to our conversation with Phyllis. Enjoy. Hey, Phyllis, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you making the time like this.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great. The podcast very much enjoy the opportunities to engage in really meaningful dialogues and conversations that matter to people. And I think with your work, with respects to your therapy work and helping people heal and essentially get to a better place, I think it's an important convo to have.
Yeah.
So maybe as a starting point, I know you've got your book, and we'll certainly talk about your book, but maybe as a starting point, if you kind of fill our audience in a little bit of your work and what you do and how you help people in the unique way that you do.
Yeah, well, I've been a psychotherapist for over 30 years. And actually, I just retired this year so I could focus on writing. Because I think, in a nutshell, what I've seen, both as a client myself and doing, psychotherapy with hundreds of people, what I've seen is that what we basically know about what helps heal us from the wounds that we've sustained from other people, what helps heal and what we know works more or less, knowing that all healing is imperfect and is a
Right.
process that takes time, could be applied to our country. What we know helps individuals could help our country. And what we know hurts individuals also hurts on a national level. So I took this sort of correlation between the psychological ill health or health of the individual and the individual family and use that lens to look at what's going on in our country, both from a point of view of how can we understand this escalating divisiveness and threats of violence and overt violence that's happening, and what could we use from the field of psychology, which is intrinsically nonpartisan, to
Right.
help us heal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a nutshell.
No, no, it certainly is. And so, first off, congratulations on a 30-year career in psychotherapy work. That's so. First, it's a long time, so congratulations. And second, to be able to work with so many different people and still be able to maintain that separation. I hear burnout oftentimes is difficult for psychotherapists in the field for as long as they have been. So
Right,
certainly
right.
congratulations on doing that and maintaining that the ability to keep on going and helping people more importantly.
Thank you. And also just to say that, as a psychotherapist, you are witness to a lot of pain that people have
Yes.
endured as you kind of walk with them through their healing journey. But the truth is, we are also feeling a lot of pain just at observing what's going on in the world, even if we're not the direct targets of the worst violence.
I think it's wonderful that you do make that draw that correlation between the larger world, the society, if you will, and what happens in our individual lives. I do think there is definitely some correlation there. I think the first step to that is some form of an awareness or recognition that there's a problem, right? Like whether we
Right.
all know that you can't fix something if you don't are not ready to admit that you need to fix it. And I think when we talk about where sort of our society is, and here in Canada, it's not much different in terms of divisiveness that you talked about, violence, absolutely. But we got to recognize the problem first, don't we?
Right, absolutely. And I think that's part of the problem is that there are many people who don't want to admit that there's a problem. And that's exactly what happens in a dysfunctional or an abusive family. There's extreme denial about what's
Mhm.
going on and how people are being hurt and the symptoms that they have, because there's a desire to protect those in power who are the ones who are often misusing and sometimes deeply harming, devastating other human beings. So denial is a huge issue, and it is a characteristic of both of an abusive family and an abusive system. And
Mhm.
so part of, there's I could probably name 100 reasons why I wrote my book, but that's one of them, is to help take us out of that place of denial in in a supportive way, not in a hate the haters way
Right.
or just blame and shame, but how do we actually interrupt this cycle so that we can all live safely, so that we can all come back together and cooperate with one another.
Mm. I wonder, you sort of alluded to sort of the backgrounds of people and the abusive families they come from. Is it, and I'm not certainly not putting words in your mouth or suggesting that, but those that are in power, do you think there's a correlation between why they perpetuate these things continuously in their backgrounds?
Oh, I do think that. And
Okay.
I do think that. I think that and I try to speak in broad strokes
Yes. Okay.
because there are patterns that we see from working with hundreds of people, and I'm certainly not alone in that as a psychotherapist. There are patterns that we see emerge when there's dysfunction and abuse or neglect in a family, and people don't get a way to escape it,
Right.
and or they don't get treatment afterwards for the harm that it's done to their emotional well-being and their behavioral patterns, which are often the symptoms. When people don't get help, they tend to live out what they've already learned
Right.
when they move into the adult world. So, in a nutshell, many people leave abusive homes feeling completely overpowered and helpless to protect themselves or protect others, because they've learned by experience that they really can't help themselves or help others, because they've been rendered powerless either physically or emotionally, or by having their needs withheld, so that they've learned that they have to submit. And so they go out into the world with a kind of helpless, submissive attitude that's not their fault. It's an
Right.
understandable symptom of what they've endured, even though we tend to blame people who become powerless. And the other resulting, a big stroke, and these are broad strokes, like I say, and
Yes.
they don't apply to every person, but they
Mhm.
apply to many people. And
Mhm.
that's what we need to know, is something called identification with the aggressor, which is, I've learned that the way you feel powerful is to be on top, be the top dog, dominate other people, get your needs met through the use of force. And those people go out into the world and they've identified with the aggressor. And if they haven't had any help to heal their own victimization, which underlies identifying with the aggressor,
Mhm.
then they tend to repeat that. And you see this actually in a lot of relationships
Right.
where a very passive person is attracted to a very dominating person, and a
Yep.
very dominating person is attracted to someone they can dominate. And then when you take that pattern and you bring it out into the larger society and our political structures, if you have people who get into positions of power, who become dominant in that way, and they can't feel empathy for what they're inflicting on other people, then you have abusers in high places. And we see this not just in America, but all over the world. And it's very scary because many of those people now have access to weapons of enormous mass destruction.
Yeah. And really what you find just so interesting is these individuals, they're in power uh, to represent the needs of the people.
Right.
And they're not recognizing the needs of the people because of their own sort of personal agenda is sort of put on the forefront. So that's sort of, and as you talked, that was an interesting point that came to mind. The other part is behavioral patterns. You reference behavioral patterns and adjusting them and fixing them and changing them only happens when you recognize there's a need to, right? So
And what
that's
often brings people to that point, unfortunately, is extreme pain and suffering. It's
yes,
like what brings people to therapy? And of course, this isn't a negative thing, but it's usually that something huge is not working in their life. They're extremely depressed. They're extremely anxious. They're raging. They're addicted. They're withdrawn. They can't express their creativity. They can't create a healthy relationship. It's that enormous pain that brings people to therapy. And my hope is, especially by educating ourselves, that we can understand that the pain in America, if we just speak about America, or we just speak about families in America or families in many countries, the pain and suffering is enormous. And could that be a call for us to actually get ourselves collectively into therapy?
right. And that's and again, it goes back to I gotta admit I have a problem, right? I have to be
Right,
able to say, yeah, this is the problem. This is what I gotta fix. This is,
right.
let me do something about it. But you're right, the pain is what is the spark, the trigger, the impetus, if you will,
Mhm.
which is unfortunate, but I at the same time, it's almost necessary.
I think it is. And I think one of the things, one of the many things that I really try to communicate to people is that it's part of an abusive system to punish the expressions of our pain. So
Hmm.
when people are peacefully demonstrating for justice or for equal rights for a certain group of people, and they're tear gassed or shot with
Right.
rubber bullets, then the message is that your pain is going to be punished.
Gotcha.
And and there are many dynamics of abusive families and abusive family systems that are directly designed, whether it's conscious or unconscious, to keep people from healing and to keep people from getting help. And I really try to go into those in great detail in my book so that the general public can really understand what these dynamics are that are happening to so many of us.
Well, I think one of the reasons why your book is so important right off the bat is that you're putting it on the forefront what some of these issues are.
Right.
Again, that awareness thing is huge in all this. I oftentimes use an analogy, like you can come into an empty room that has furniture, but with the light off, you can't see the furniture in your living room. You
That's
can't see the coffee table. You can't see the couch. You can't see the lamp. But when you turn on that switch, you then see those things, but the light you turned on didn't put them there. They already were there, right? So you're
that's
just
right.
illuminating it.
That's right. And that really brings up such an important subject, which is when we begin to illuminate the darkness,
Mhm.
the violence, the roots of violence and the roots of hatred and the roots of discrimination and injustice, when we illuminate those things, we really need to do that with an attitude of what can bring healing, what can bring us back together, what can help us really listen deeply to one another with
Right.
empathy and not just act out once we see the differences. And that's the great gift of psychotherapy, is that it really teaches people how to communicate deeply with one another and with themselves. And if their own wounds are in the way of
Right.
them wanting to hear what another person has to say, then the focus is then on trying to heal the things that they've internalized that have hurt them and impaired their ability to have healthy relationship.
Much, and I want to just talk about the roots for a moment here, Phyllis, because I think, and we've sort of identified this conversation already, that much comes from our upbringing, our
Right,
childhood.
right.
Is it fair to say that's where a large majority of the issue lies, or are there other factors that are also equally of importance that contribute to these unhealthy roots?
Well, I think today we have to look at our families of origin, not that they're necessarily where it all began, because a lot of abuse and neglect is passed down from
Yeah.
generation to generation. People reenact what they've already witnessed, experienced, and been exposed to. But I think we have to look, and this is again one of the things that I try to address. I think we have to look at the intersection between what's going on in the family and
Mhm.
what's going on in our larger family systems.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
just like parents are role models for their children about how you deal with conflict and what the expectations are and how love is expressed or not expressed, what are the rewards and consequences for different behaviors, just as parents role model those things in an either in a healthy way or an abusive way, larger institutions and the people in power in them role model the same things. So
Right.
if you have people in positions of huge amount of power who are actively discriminating against certain populations within their country or their organization, then that's the role model that people are internalizing.
Right.
And you've already internalized that in your family system, that it's okay to target certain vulnerable people, then and it's reinforced in the larger circles you move in and depend on, then look at what we're teaching each other.
Right.
And we can reverse that. And that's, the
Yeah.
title of my book is America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a
Yes.
Nation in Crisis. There are ways to heal, and people do break people do break the cycle of violence in their own lives.
Hmm.
People who have become passive learn to have an active voice in their lives and stand up for themselves and others. And people who have been overempowered and who have been aggressive can heal and
Yes.
become safe. And we need to know that there's hope there.
Right. Right. So one of the things I'm thinking about as you're talking is that it seems that this issue is continuing to rise or escalate and increase,
Right,
um, as opposed to what we want to see go the other direction.
right.
And I don't know if it's of a case where, I mean, with everything, with information being so readily available, social media, everything's in front of us. Is it a case that we're seeing more of it, or was it something that was always there, and but because it's more visible, it just seems to be a lot more?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's an influencing factor. The whole social media realm,
Yeah.
in many ways, not in all ways, there's some fabulous uses of social media, like the
Yes.
podcast that people are on, or where people are just sharing information about how to heal,
Hmm.
how to grow things more healthfully, all the things that are really good that go on social
Yes.
media. But we also know that there's a lot of violence spread on social media, and that there's a lot of role modeling of how sort of like great it is to be the top dog and bully other people, and people who have been disempowered often identify with the bully. And so when you have this all over the media, it
Yes.
also really, I think it intensifies it. Dr. Bandy Lee calls it a contagion. It's like an emotional contagion, and that's definitely true. And you can see it on a playground, you can see it in a place of business, you can see it, in larger and larger segments of society. But I think there's also another element, and that is that from all my years of being a psychotherapist,
Hmm.
I would say that families are really in trouble. They're really hurting. The amount of abuse and neglect in the individual family, and again, I don't know the history from 100 years ago, but
Right.
it is way more than I think any of us would like to know or believe.
Right.
That the stories people tell me who appear like they're living ordinary lives of what they have suffered in their own homes. And then we have to ask, what have their parents suffered that they treat their children in these
Right.
very inhuman ways. So that I think it's happening on both levels. And that's why I think we have to look at the way the microcosm and the macrocosm are intersecting now. That's actually, I think, accelerating our addictions to power, our addictions to, all the things that harm us, and the denial that goes along with acknowledging that we're really in trouble, not
Right.
only as Americans, but as a human race.
It was interesting because I was going to ask you if we are in a mental health crisis, but as you're talking, we clearly are.
I believe we are. I believe we're in a deep mental health crisis. And one of the ways that I think that becomes obvious if we look is that many of the policies and practices that we condone
Hmm.
on a national level, we would never want to have be enacted on ourselves.
Mm. Mm.
Nobody wants to be bombed in their home.
Right.
Nobody wants to have their access to medical care become so expensive that they can't afford it and that they're turned away.
Right.
No one wants their children to get a poor education. No one wants to live in a rat-infested building.
Right.
And certainly no one wants to be bombed into oblivion. And yet we condone and allow these things to happen to other people. And we've been taught that all these things are the problems of an ideological divide, but actually they're ill mental health,
Mm.
because mentally healthy people don't do these things to one another. They
Right.
just don't. They
Right.
care. They've
Well,
been
well,
for
it,
and they care.
it's if that we've forgotten or lost our humanity, right?
I absolutely.
Like
That's
that.
exactly how I would say it.
That's because you're right. When you talk about those things that we wouldn't perpetrate on ourselves, then why would you think it's okay for other people? And the other thing too, these individuals, if you were to ask them, they go, absolutely, no, I wouldn't do it to myself. No, there's no way. And they might even think it's wrong to do it to others, even though they're still perpetuating it.
Yes, and unfortunately, one of the signs of an abuser is that they justify why they do it to other people.
Mm,
There's a
mm,
justification. That person is inferior, they're a taker, they're a sinner,
they
they're
deserved it. Yes.
lazy, they're entitled.
Mm,
And we just heap these justifications for abuse, and justifying abuse is a sign of mental unwellness. But in the process, with someone who has great power can enroll lots of people in the same belief, and that separates them from their own humanity. And I would say that abuse helps separate abuse itself. For a person who has sustained abuse and not been rescued and not gotten treatment, there is a part of their own humanity that they have to turn off to survive often.
yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important to not only interrupt the cycle of abuse, but find the victim inside the abuser.
Mm. Do that
Uh,
work again. Do that work again, right?
That's right. And there's a beautiful man named, his name is Brian Stevenson, and I don't know if you've heard of him, but I believe his work is he's a lawyer, and I believe his work is focused on trying to get people out of jail who were falsely imprisoned in the first
Mm.
place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he does a lot of work with incarcerated people. But this beautiful statement that he made that I love to repeat is, no one is the worst thing they've ever done.
Mm.
We have an essence inside of ourselves. We don't always know how to reach that in the most wounded people, but we do know how to reach it in many people. And could that be our commitment? To find the essence underneath the person who has been harmful. And I would just add to that, not only are we not the worst thing we've ever done, but we're not the worst thing that ever happened to us either. And so many people end up being defined by being ill-treated, and they think they're unlovable, and they think they're unworthy, and they think they're inferior, or they think they deserved it. And none of that is true. And we have to help each other see that and
Right.
actually embody that as we interact with one another.
So my mind, Phyllis, sort of jumps ahead to, okay, so we like we've been in this conversation, we've talked extensively about what the issues are, the problems, and some of the causes, and so that's black and white, and it's very, very, very clear when we talk about how we make some of those changes. And it's interesting because I would say that so we talk nationally, right? So we talk about this being a national issue, but also at a family level or personal level as well too. will the strategies change? I mean, one now obviously nationally a lot larger, so the bigger strategies, but in the essence, are the strategies different for how you attack this thing?
I don't think so, not in their essence. I think, one of the things, there's a combination between healing our own wounds, and that often involves, and I would say most often involves, that we have to look back at our conditioning. What happened to us early on as we were forming our beliefs and our role models for behavior and our attitudes toward other people? What happened to us and what shaped that? So if I lived in a family and I grew up learning to hate a certain population, or I grew up thinking that it was really okay to beat people because that's just how then that's what that's what I've internalized. So let me say it more specifically. If I was beaten as a kid and I was told it was my fault, and I grew up then believing that I am worthy of abuse, that is going to make me highly symptomatic in some way. Either I'm
Right.
going to be attracted to an abuser, I'm going to become an abuser, I'm going to fail to thrive in some way in life. It may not be simple, but I will have symptoms and they will hurt me, and they often hurt other people. And so I need to heal that. I need to go back into my past and be able to feel the pain of what happened to me, to be able to express it without being judged,
Right.
without being condemned, without being hurried along the path to like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but to really like release the pain and internalize through whatever a good therapy process does to do this, that what I was taught to believe about myself that's negative is not the truth of who I am.
Right.
It
Right.
was something that I was taught to believe. And as we get to reprocess that, we start to believe more positive things about ourselves that are the truth of the essence of the persons we are. And positive beliefs inevitably always lead to more positive coping mechanisms, how we are in relationship, how we treat ourselves and other people. So some of the work is internal. What if we were funding that? What if we were funding therapy for all people? Psychotherapy is
Yep.
just automatically a part of what we put our
Yep.
our national resources toward,
Right.
because, and I want to say this, our most precious, our most valuable natural resource is us.
Yeah.
Safe people make it safe for other people. Unsafe people do untold damage.
They do. They do. I'm so glad that you talked about the belief system. I actually smiled as you're talking about it because I truly fundamentally believe that that's the heart of all good
Right,
things that can come out of this is what you believe and what you think about yourself, our perception of yourself. These are all important factors because if we, for example, if we see ourselves as an unworthy person, then that's how we go out
right,
into the world and the damage that potentially we can cause, as you said, is it takes a tremendous toll.
right,
So on this podcast we talk so much about encourage individuals to live their best audacious lives, and a big part of that is being able to understand truly who we are at the core, our own
right.
essence. Because if we're not being real or true to ourselves, then we can't go and have that type of impact, that positive impact that I believe we're all destined to.
Right,
Issue though being that if there are things holding us back, if it's our mental health challenges, our belief system is off, our upbringing has framed us in a certain way, and we can't see anything differently, then we're not going to live our best audacious lives. So this is
that's right.
this is a huge issue we're talking about here.
I mean, it's absolutely enormous. And one of the things, if you don't mind, I just want to zoom out to a country. I'm
Yeah.
talking about America,
Yep.
but we can talk about any country here. And that is, we also have to look at our origins and our past. We have a history. We have millions of people who have come to America who were fleeing trauma,
Yes.
war, oppression, religious persecution, poverty. They brought all their traumas with them,
Yes.
and psychology wasn't even a subject They brought all their unhealed traumas with them, and they passed much of that down to future generations completely uninterrupted. And
Right.
yes, people also brought their strengths and their gifts and their spirit of adventure and their industriousness and their inventiveness. And we have all those good things. But you can have a really healthy body. But if you drink poison, you're going to die. And we can have lots of really healthy things going on in our country. But if we have a cancerous, growth of violence and hatred, and that's coming down from the top as well as up from the bottom, then we could off ourselves. And I think it's a real threat to the human race.
Wow. Wow. No, absolutely, I believe it. I see it, and we see it being perpetuated all the time. And so, at some point, there's got to like there's a give point, right, where it just enough is enough, and
Right.
so, and we, as we identified, it's not shrinking, it's not getting smaller, it's only expanding.
And when if I may, I want to say, like, if we look at our own history as a country, we've colonized people, we've tried to decimate the Native Americans, we've done horrible things to the Black community and all the people that we've enslaved. We still don't have equal rights for women in America. Many marginalized communities are the targets of violence and hatred. Um, I think one of the beauties of psychotherapy that I really want to emphasize is that, many of us have been hurt, but most of us have also hurt somebody.
Yes.
And can we make it safe to just say, I did something wrong. I hurt you, and I want to make amends. And one of the ways that I will make amends is I will behave differently now. And it takes great strength and great courage to actually own the things that we've done that are not so pretty. It's a
Right.
little easier to talk about the things that have hurt us, and it's not always easy to talk about them.
Mhm.
Um, but so we need to create what I would call a therapeutic environment in our country that makes it safe to say, I was wrong. I
Mhm.
did a terrible thing. And you probably familiar with the Truth and Reconciliation Project in South Africa. And I think that's a role model for how we could begin. It wasn't perfect and it didn't heal everything, but it was really on the right path, I think, from a psychological point of view, because it made it safe for the perpetrators to acknowledge what they did and to hear the impact that they had on the people that they
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah.
And that is the beginning of healing,
It is.
whether it's between people or in ourselves.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is a starting point, and I think a part of that also is being okay with being vulnerable to be able to say, "I am hurting." Right? You have
Right,
caused me pain, and not fear of fear of reprisal or anything like that.
right.
So it's definitely multi-layered, Phyllis, without question,
Well,
and there's lots of different strategies. If you can give your book title one more time for our audience and let them know where they could find it, that'd be great.
yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you. It's called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And I address this to America, but really it could apply all around the world. But since I'm an American and I'm familiar with this country, I speak to America.
Understood.
The best way to find me is on my website, www.phyllisleavitt.com, and that's PhyllisLeavitt.com. I have lots of articles on LinkedIn and posts and on Facebook and Instagram, and I have starting to put some articles on Substack as well. And then I have lots and lots of video interviews on YouTube. So contact.
I thought you were retired. You look like you're doing more work than ever, sounds
You
Phyllis.
know what? I'm actually working full time on my book. I really am.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Listen, I really appreciate this, Phyllis. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your book, and keep up the fantastic work.
And thank you. And may I add you to my email list?
Absolutely.
I would love to send you a free copy of my book, and I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay.
All the
You
best,
take
Phyllis.
care.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Back we are here on the podcast, and I appreciate Phyllis for taking the time and hanging out with us. I think about our conversation, a key takeaway from our chat with Phyllis is really the power of self-awareness and vulnerability, in achieving true healing and personal growth. By recognizing our past traumas and embracing our vulnerabilities, we can move towards a more authentic and fulfilling life. Now, to connect with Phyllis directly and explore more further insights or check out her book, she has lots to share. I'd encourage you to pop into the show notes below and get her contact details as well. Tap into her resources because they certainly are some good stuff. Now, as we wrap up this episode of the Audacious Living Podcast, I encourage you to follow, subscribe, share if you haven't already done so, because that is how we continue to spread the word of positivity and empowerment. And your support helps us reach and grow and reach out to other listeners that on their particular journey of audacious living. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, embrace your authenticity, live boldly, and never stop striving for your best audacious life. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.